Hi there, my name is Renee Hobbs, and today I'm here with my colleagues, DC Vito and Paul Mihailidis, and we are talking about Danah Boyd's recent essay, Did Media Literacy Backfire? We're going to take about 15 minutes to talk about our response to the article. So we invite you to read the article before you watch our reaction. So let's take it away, and we're each going to try to summarize the article before we critically analyze it. Paul, maybe can you begin by summarizing some of the key ideas that you got out of this piece?
Sure. So first, I think the piece comes at a time when there's a lot of kind of renewed dialogue and public discussion around media literacy and its role in helping us think through. I think first one is the piece has, as kind of a provoking personal reflection media literacy. I think there are some here that are worth our community engaging with. So I do think, this notion of how media literacy approaches truth and how media literacy approaches polarization and distrust and self-segregation, and what is media literacy doing at various points in both as a formal pedagogy in K-12 schools, but also as a space for communities and citizens to engage with media. So I do think that Boyd puts an argument together that needs to be that we need to acknowledge and add into the discussion, because I feel like media literacy needs to think about how far it's come and where it can advance in its work as a tool for kind of building critical citizens.
Yep. As I see it, Boyd's major claim is that the fragmentation and political polarization that we're seeing is really the result of valuing experience over expertise, of diminishing trust in authority, and she believes that media literacy has contributed to this growing polarization by creating a culture of mistrust. DC, what's your take on summarizing some of the ideas that were meaningful to you in this piece?
Well, the thing that comes across after reading it a couple of times is that I feel like Danah's very afraid of the lack of trust shown by people of authority and expertise. And I think it would definitely be in her benefit that was not happening, because she does assume a role of an authority, and she is someone who has a great deal of expertise. I mean, she's a very knowledgeable individual, and she's counted on by a lot of people in the community for her and her colleagues' thoughts. So I get from this a lot of fear, and based on that, I feel like it's kind of scattershot, because I don't think that she has a clear resonance of what to do with that fear.
Great. So we've kind of summarized our brief understanding of the article. Now we thought we would respond to it with our own reaction. So DC, I'm going to throw it back to you, and then Paul, and then me. What points do we want to make in responding or talking back to Danah's essay? DC?
Well, there is, in the opening sentence, many progressives are calling for an increased commitment to media literacy programs. And I'm not sure who these progressives are that she's referring to, and I'm not seeing what seems to be a hypothesis that there's been a widespread practice of media literacy education happening across this country. Our organization, The Lamp, has been around for 10 years, and there are not many other organizations like us in those 10 years. We've not seen a super growth of people doing media literacy. And so I'm not sure where that comes from to be able to say that did media literacy backfire? Where could it possibly have backfired?
Okay, so maybe her assumption that media literacy is ubiquitous in the culture is part of is a good way for us to start with a critique. Paul, what's your take on critically responding to this essay?
Right. So I think so. I will take a little bit of another point of view here. So I think there's a lot of it's an essay, and I think the intention of the author, if nothing else, is to start a conversation. There's a lot of assumptions in here, and I think she's probably coming from, or my reading of this is that she's coming from this point of media literacy as being she talks about it as being a distanced approach to critiquing media and having that as an act to become more skeptical and more personally responsible about your media habits. And so what I imagine, and her thesis, that is contributing to some of the distrust and talking past each other and polarization and segregation. So my assumption is that part of what this hasn't accounted for is all the ways that media literacy in pockets and in communities and in schools is helping young people and young citizens and to really kind of engage in a deeper dialogue and deeper engagement in local community and local activism. And that's happening. And I think this piece disregards that simply to start the conversation that I think we're all struggling to have, which is how do we respond after this kind of really heightened firestorm around media around the election. And so, but I do think it doesn't acknowledge all the work that people like DC are doing and that other communities are doing, and how that does stand to bring people together in unique ways.
Right. I do think that that's a really great point, that by her framing media literacy as this form of personal responsibility, she actually defines media literacy too narrowly, because so much of media literacy is built on creating, collaborating, and taking action in ways that are evidence of civic or collaborative social responsibility. So in her imagination, media literacy is this kind of private individual thing. But we all know that it's more than that. Yeah. So I guess my critique of the piece is really that I feel like Dana's kind of created a little bit of media literacy is kind of a bit of a straw man, right? So like, let's call media literacy and let's bash it down. But by media literacy, I don't think she's really critiquing media literacy. I think she's critiquing the politics or the ideology of the Enlightenment, right? And maybe the ideology and the politics of the Enlightenment does need a critique in the post-truth internet age, right? But so what are the challenges to Enlightenment values of rationality? Right, of the valorizing of the individual, of respecting the dignity of the individual to be responsible for their own interpretations of media messages. It's for valuing expression as a valued part of contributing to a society, right? So she does critique those values and wonders, I think, whether or not they still serve us, but. Let's not call that, let's recognize that she's critiquing the Enlightenment values, and media literacy happens to embody some of those Enlightenment values.
Right. I agree, Renee. And I think that this, and I think part of this is part of her stance has to do with this notion that media literacy has, in her opinion, has been kind of apolitical. So the notion that, perhaps it was the media literate that were propagating this fake news, or that were the ones who were advocating for some of the kind of misinformation that spread online. And I think I actually think that that puts this very kind of, it almost puts a reductionist approach to media literacy, saying that it's really only about skills and it's really only about helping people decipher, where it's actually not. That's like the first step in a very complete trajectory of the field that really engages with how people act and how people connect and how people share. And those things need to be included in these discussions, or else media literacy becomes this solutionism or this panacea that's lined up to fail before it even begins.
Mm-hmm. DC, I saw in your notes, I saw you had marked up your copy quite a lot. What other ideas in this piece do you want to respond to?
Well, in the underlying assumption in all of this is that there's a universal agreement that major news outlets like the New York Times, scientific journal publication, and experts with advanced degrees are all highly trustworthy. I'm not sure what whose underlying assumption is that, and what is it? It's the point of critical thinking is not to provide a source of safe sources. Here's the information. This is where you go. Don't worry about it. We figured it out for you. You need to teach that inquiry. You need to teach and spark the curiosity in our youth and get them thinking about these things, because they will be the problem solvers of the future. If we're just saying, no, the problems have been solved, we've fixed it for you, these are the sources that you need to trust, and just go there, we're doing our young people a disservice. And we're not going to be giving them the tools that they need to actually live in this world where they're going to be constantly faced with new challenges and new messages and information that they're going to need to question.
Right. But she's got a point. That is absolutely the case. And I do think that reflects the media literacy perspective generally for most people. She does have a point about this cultural phenomenon where people trust their lived experience more than they trust authority. And you say, and that's actually preferable to blind trust of authority. But blind trust of experience is just as problematic, right?
Oh, yeah.
We would agree with that.
Yeah.
See, I feel like media literacy pays a lot of attention to evidence and reasoning. And so why would she think that media literacy contributed to trusting the social phenomenon of trusting experience over evidence? I feel like that's another much larger cultural phenomenon. McLuhan was talking about that in the 60s, how the nature of knowledge is changing and the epistemological shifts that are coming from the technology and the cultural change is really the cause, not the pedagogy of media literacy, right? So, and in fact, I think media literacy educators often pay a lot of attention to epistemology. We ask students, how do you know what you know? Right? So it's weird that she would see us as the problem. To me. And to me, that makes me wonder about whether or not this essay was itself a kind of clickbait. After all, there's not a single reference to media literacy pedagogy in the piece or practice or the network of organizations that exists globally. And I wonder if, the headline got attention, but it actually really just got attention in that kind of shallow, superficial way.
Yeah, but
so I wonder if the thing she's actually critiquing, she's actually engaging in herself.
Yeah, and the thing that Paul mentioned earlier about, we're looking at this, and this is potentially damaging of the notion of media literacy and what people know what media literacy is, because right now there is a moment that potentially could benefit folks who are practicing media literacy. But she says, and if we just push Facebook to curb the spread of fake news, all will be solved. That is not media literacy. Media literacy is not turning off the television. It's not burning books. That's not what media literacy is about. And it completely denies the idea of civic engagement around media that happens in media literacy, and the idea of turning folks into active media explorers.
So is she intentionally misrepresenting media literacy for some kind of political purpose?
I don't think so. I mean, I think to be contrarian to this, I really don't think, I think like what this piece did is get us around the table to talk about it, which I think is positive. We don't get to do this often. But I also think it is really, it struck with me some things that I'm thinking about on media literacy, perhaps less in the formal pedagogy space, but is true that media literacy, if the point of engagement is, let's say, deconstructing advertisements, or if the point of engagement is, deconstructing a piece, I don't think that that's hard for me to be seen as moving a dial. And I think she's really questioning this, something that I'm questioning as well, that in this age of like the notion that we could have this evidence and epistemology in an age when people are really, research is showing how much more we are simply skimming and headlines and sharing and reposting, that this notion that we would stop and have a distanced critique of this information, that was challenged in this election, that it was really, and for me, I think where I find value in this is perhaps not in so much as the evidence she showed, but the ideas that she's speaking to, this notion that like we are grappling with truth, and we are grappling with, in my sense, my implicit bias for me to respond at every single headline in one way, but still acknowledge and follow that headline. That's a problem, and I'm just as guilty about that as anyone else. And I don't think we should, I think we need to, as a community, really attest to the idea that maybe just putting a bunch of kids in front of a screen, not even kids in my space, but young people around this, isn't the only way we need to do this. And so I would like us to think about that and use this piece to start those conversations.
Wow. Okay. So DC, what are your thoughts about that? Paul says maybe this essay actually has provoked us in a way that actually does have implications for the pedagogy and practice of media literacy.
Well, I feel that the piece would serve better if it were better written, and I don't think that it's well written. I think it's a mishmash of points that are not necessarily followed through. And I'm always happy for conversations to be sparked. I believe that fake news is an illness, and for every person who is on the internet and they are not media literate, they are a vector for that illness, and they're going to be passing it along and infecting people with the illness of fake news if we do not teach them how to challenge and create counter narratives. And that's the point that I don't get from this. And I agree with Paul, and Paul and I, we've had this conversation not too long ago about what we believe needs to be happening. And we believe it has to be making people more active, and giving them the tools to be creators and to understand how media and all of our biases are constructing the stuff that we're seeing.
Wow. I think in a way what we have here is some ideas about what is some questions about what is the problem and what are the solutions, right? Mm-hmm. I do feel that the fake news phenomenon has created an opportunity that has potentially flattened and trivialized media literacy, as mm-hmm. people think that the solution is a list of trustworthy sites, right? Or a list of untrustworthy sites, right? And that whole valorization of expertise, which is, yes, we all long, it wouldn't it be great if there was somebody we could trust, as if that were really a solution, as we look at the rise of authoritarian countries and how dangerous it is for democracy to have that kind of trust of expertise, and how much we're fearful about that in our own country. So DC, I think your point is a good one, because I do feel like at the center of the media literacy enterprise is going to be something like asking critical questions and creating and collaborating as a community to use the power of communication and expression to make a difference in the world. I do feel like, Paul, your point about, yes, we need some new paradigms, and maybe we even need to question the practice of critical inquiry, given the realities of how little we do it, how little we have time for it, right? In the context of our new media. And all of those topics are things we're going to be talking about at the Northeast Media Literacy Conference, which is coming up on February 4th in New Britain, Connecticut at Central Connecticut State University. So in some ways, the dialogue will continue in meet space, right? where we can be face to face, drinking coffee with a glass of wine, and really having a really robust dialogue. Danah Boyd, we invite you to come to the Northeast Media Literacy Conference in New Britain, Connecticut on February 4th. It's just an hour away from where you live. We want to continue the conversation with you because we do feel you have provoked a lot of thinking about your interesting and important essay. So on behalf of DC Vito at the Lamp and Paul Mihailidis at Emerson College, we're going to say thank you for tuning in to our little webinar, and we hope to see you on February 4th. All right, bye now.
Bye.